Today, Brian and I are here with Mike Spencer. He is the owner and manager of Spencer Legal Investigations in Walnut Creek, California. Hello, Mike. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for joining us today. So, you're a private investigator, which is super cool. So, we wanted first and foremost to tell us a little bit about yourself and how'd you land that? How'd you end up there?
So, I don't think many people intend to become private investigators. It's sort of a job that you fall into, and sure enough, that's what happened to me. When I was a teenager, I thought I was going to be a journalist, a newspaper reporter. So that's what I worked at. I grew up in a suburb of Connecticut. And from the time I was 16, I started covering sports for the local weekly newspaper. And it was always in the back of my mind, I'll become a newspaper reporter. Along the way, I went ahead and I got a English degree from a liberal arts college, Franklin Marshall College in Pennsylvania. But all along, I was preparing for a newspaper career. So I kept getting published in weeklies and dailies. After college, I got a job at a daily in rural Virginia, like 3 hours, 2.5 hours outside of DC. Then I was accepted to the Graduate School of Journalism at UC Berkeley, and I got a job at a daily in California. But by then, I was developing an interest in crime reporting. So all the other journalists I'd ever talked to said, if you really want to be a crime reporter, you got to go to Florida. So sure enough, I took a job at the Sarasota Herald Tribune in Florida. And a little tidbit is I replaced the Pee Wee Herman reporter. The reporter who broke the stories about Pee Wee Herman in the 90s in trouble in a theater, I replaced that reporter. So for the next 2.5 years or more, I worked at that paper in Florida. Fast forward, it's about 94 going into 95. I realize I'm not going up to the upper echelons of newspaper reporting. So I just come back to the Bay Area, unemployed. And one day I answer an ad in the newspaper for a workers' compensation claims investigator. And that's how I got my start in investigations. And like anything else, you just kind of keep working up through the rungs. And I realized with private investigations, when you work under someone else, the money isn't that great. So pretty early on, I realized I need to get my own license. In California, it takes 6,000 hours, which is 3 years full-time experience to qualify for the test. Then you have to pass an exam. So I argued my newspaper reporting should count for some of those hours. I became licensed like early 1997 and started my business. So that's how I got here.
That's true. I mean, you're a newspaper reporter, you're doing a ton of investigation, you know?
Well, it's on a deadline. It's very condensed. And in newspapers are kind of taking a beating right now, but it's drilled into you. You better get it right. You better get the names right, the facts right, all of that stuff, or you're going to be writing your own correction the next day. So you're going to be in the boss's doghouse and you're going to look bad. So it develops in you sort of I cannot get this wrong. So you double and triple check your information.
Your facts,
That's the training. It's pretty valuable for being an investigator too.
Yeah. But from the beginning, I mean, from that first workers' kind of compensation field, you've now kind of shifted, and where you are today, you are actually, you do trial lawyers and businesses, correct? Correct.
Mostly, I would say 80% of my business is serving trial lawyers in criminal defense cases. Everyone who is arrested and charged in our justice system is entitled to an investigation, whether that comes from a public defender or a private attorney who then picks the private investigator to work with. So I do the work for criminal defense attorneys and for civil attorneys, plaintiffs' attorneys in wrongful death and personal injury cases. So pretty big legal cases, what I like to work on.
So what does that entail as far as, interviewing witnesses? Are you going out and following people? Well,
it's a lot of, in these cases, criminal defense and personal injury, you're always going to go to the scene and look around. For example, what you read in a police report that's one person's version. So you always need to double check the scene. What's the lighting like? What are the angles like? What did it look like at that time of night? You're looking for, 15 years ago, attorneys started to ask me, hey, look for some cameras, see if there are any cameras around. And back then, I'd kind of be like, yeah, whatever. I'm sure there's nothing. But now, there's a very good chance that there's going to be a camera at a scene. So you're trying to locate footage. You're doing a lot of things. You're interviewing witnesses, and you're sort of assessing the credibility. I'm the eyes and ears for the attorney. So I'm trying to help that attorney weigh their evidence and say, well, this is good for your guy or your person. This isn't. You're looking for records, looking for past news articles, public records. Your social media is really interesting because, as you know, some people live their lives through social media. Other people, not so much. So that's just all over the map. And that's how we do it.
Does that vary by age, the social media thing? I was just
I think it does. Like, look at your own family. There are exceptions. Like, I have one brother and his son, educated people. They have no digital footprint. They keep it that way. Like, my nephew has 3 kids, and I think he really goes out of his way to keep those kids off. He and his wife go out of their way. So, but I would generalize, yes, that the under 40 crowd is probably more on social media. Just a generalization.
Do people wind up? Do people actually? I mean, are there some people out there? I know you can't give us details, but they actually wind up in, I guess, incriminating themselves through social media that you've encountered, or wind up,
I encounter it. It's never like this big. I haven't had sort of this big damning aha via social media,
right.
But it's part of the picture.
I gotcha.
So some people will say some things, and you just sort of make note of it. What it's useful for is that it leads you to other information. You figure out, oh, this person's an associate of this person.
What do people get wrong all the time?
Well, briefly, I had this book published 2 years ago. It's called Private Eye Confidential Stories from a Real PI. And it's 99 pages. It's published by 99 The Press. And one of the real reasons I wrote it was to just correct misconceptions about the business. This is sort of a mini memoir and how I go about my business. But I think the misconceptions is that we're either sleazy or unethical or uneducated. And certainly none of those things apply. And I realized my parents and my family didn't really know what I did for work. My close friends really didn't either. So the book was just a exercise in telling people, hey, here's how I go about doing my business. And it was fun because it's 99 pages. I really had to condense my thoughts and get them in order to write it. And it's fun too. It's just a fun little book.
I was thinking a little bit about discretion, right? So if in what you do, right, does it require some discretion on your part? I'm sure. Yep. And if somebody wanted to conduct themselves in a sneaky way or wanted to know if they were, being followed, what are those, what kind of things do people not think about that maybe you think about because you're in this every day and doing that?
I'll tell you what, this is what when I do a little bit of surveillance, like if I have to serve papers on a difficult subject, or sometimes maybe it does come up in a family law capacity, this is what I would tell people. This is what I focus on. I focus on where do you work? I focus on where do you live? I focus on what do you drive? The car is the key. That's really what I'm looking for. For example, if I have to serve someone who's dodging, I'll wait down the block. If I know what they drive, I'm not going to sit right next to their house. But I'm really looking for cars. And over time, we're all creatures of habit. That's the other thing I'd say. So over time, you do figure out people's habits if you have the budget for it. Now, people sometimes I get callers and they wonder, they'll come up with these scenarios that they're being followed, their phones are tapped. And the first thing I always ask people is why? Why would someone do this? I think if you're not involved in a lawsuit, you have not pissed someone off, you have not had a bad breakup, I probably think no one's going to follow you. But maybe you are. Maybe you have wronged some people or you're a whistleblower. So what I would always tell people, if you sort of want to spot surveillance, if you're in your car, just go down dead end streets or go through like a big parking lot, like start at one end of it and go through the other. Take a look at the car that's behind you. When you go into the parking lot, go all the way through, take another look. So drag that person through places where you know it's intentional that they're following you. That's what I would do.
So I have a question about, you talked about a lot about surveillance, right? And over time, you talked about digital footprint. How much has become of your job as a private investigator is digital surveillance versus actual real life surveillance?
It's a combination. As I mentioned, in like some of those big cases, that's one of the first things we're going to do is go through the social media and look for that. So in some ways, I think that sort of monitoring digital and social media is outpacing the traditional surveillance. But it all depends on the case. If you had I don't do a lot of these, but obviously, like if you had a disability claim, someone's out on a workers' comp, then the physical mobile surveillance is going to become more important. So it sort of depends on the nature of the case.
Gotcha.
So you've been doing this for a long time. So, the evolution, that kind of shift to incorporating digital, then, how did you make how did you really, all you had was physical, right? So do you feel that digital has helped, or were there other methods?
It's a part of the picture. And so what I've done is I think like in learning anything new, you sort of become conversant in it. And then like, if I have something that I think is really going to focus on social media, I'll partner with someone who's far more expert at it than I am. So I think with a lot of things in business, you sort of have to realize where your knowledge ends and you need the help of someone who's more professional.
So your book, right? Confessions from a Real PI. What would you
Private Eye Confidential.
Confidential. Private Eye Confidential. What would you say is one of the most outrageous things you've come across over the course?
A few things, and one of them, I actually have an animated video of it. If you go on YouTube and type in Private Eye Confidential, there's a 4-minute animated video. And I don't want to give it away too much, but it was a case of I call it the case of the jealous blind man. And the theme of it is it's about someone who cannot trust anyone. Doesn't trust his wife, doesn't trust his family. So it was all sort of going through all these hoops. It involves porn movies. It involves a lot of strange things. But in the end, I pretty much confirmed to this guy that, yes, he could trust his wife. He could trust his daughter. But it's all about how just some people are just massively untrusting. And that's what that story is really about. It's called if you do the YouTube video for Private Eye Confidential, it comes up. It's a animated video.
We'll put that in the links too.
There's one other funny story was I had an old business partner who is he's younger than me, and he's a former Army Ranger. So we had a client who got involved with a woman, and this client had given his car to this woman, and the woman took off with the car. But we had this is a while ago. This is like the first GPS device we ever used. And the problem with the GPS device was it wasn't all that great. Like it could get it down to like a quarter mile to a half mile.
Mm.
And so one night I'm going out to dinner with my wife, and I see, the car is moving, and it's going all the way down I-5, all the way down, all the way down. I-5 is the big north-south route in California.
Mhm.
And it stopped in this area that's like halfway between, it finally parks. And it's parked in this area that is between Disneyland or like an army base or like a military base. And the client authorizes my partner and I to go and recover the car. So we go down there, and my partner, then the former Army Ranger, he spends like 3 hours walking every parking lot in Disneyland and is looking for the car. We didn't find it that night, but we found it the next day. My partner, the guy's amazing. Jeremy finds the car the next day, like recovers it, brings it back. Just this is amazing job. And I think the client gave it back to the woman. He gave it back, but then we eventually came to his senses, and we recovered it again and dropped it off. So, but it's just sort of the, when maybe with Valentine's coming up, it's sort of the like when love goes wrong or people have bad judgments in their personal life. But it was recovering that car, that was like the needle in the haystack, and we got it.
So do you feel that over the course of your career, your view on humans has changed at all? Because we're really big on being good humans, and I wonder if you've seen so much, lying and cheating and all of this, negativity. Has that changed like how much you trust other people? Or
I think I'm still fairly trusting in my personal life. Like I can sort of flip that button on and off. I realize, okay, when I'm getting paid, I'm very curious. If I'm just Mike the person, and I write about it in the book a little bit, if I'm just Mike the person, I tend to be trusting until some big red flag goes up. But I think you have to be somewhat trusting in your personal and professional life. Otherwise, you're going to drive yourself crazy. But when I do take on new clients, I do what I call like the 3-minute test. Maybe you guys do too. In business is, if I like that client and they sort of answer my questions in the first 3 minutes, and I think I can help them and work with them, then great. I'm all in. Sometimes in that 3 minutes, you realize though, like maybe you're not a match. I would also tell anyone, maybe this sounds a little paranoid, but maybe it's obvious too, is sort of like, watch your money. If you're a small business owner or a business owner, who controls the money? Who controls getting the mail? Don't let yourself get blindsided by that. Always sort of keep tabs on your own mail for the business. Certainly maybe once a week, look at the statements for your bank. Just basic things like that. And then also with family is, whenever anyone new comes into your family, maybe you have an elderly relative and you're taking them into a care home, or you're bringing in an in-home care person, keep an eye on new situations, dealing with your loved ones. But it's a balancing act, because if you dwell too much on it, you're going to just drive yourself crazy. But you do need a little bit of it for business and personal.
I'll tell you, I actually, when you said that, I was thinking about a gentleman I know who owns a business, and his partner was blindly just taking money. I mean, like $50,000, $100,000, like just bleeding the account, and he didn't know, because he never looked. He didn't know. And then one day he realized what was going on, and he was like, "What happened?" Because he just didn't look, and I don't know why, but I when you said that, I was like, I guess people really don't, because like you're saying things, and I'm thinking, well, wouldn't anybody keep an eye on that person? Maybe not, maybe not.
Yeah.
You see that a lot, where there's people just don't think to check up on.
I think it happens. It's sort of like you see it like nonprofits get taken advantage of by bookkeepers, or you'll see some bad actors and they just kind of go like from business to business because like no one, it's tricky too because like with checking references, most places cannot say like so-and-so is a really bad employee. They'll just say, well, you know, they worked here for 2 years and that's that.
Yeah.
So I just would just tell people, just be a little bit cautious.
Yeah, I think to your point, as soon as you see a red flag, you know, go and investigate. Like if something doesn't sit right, you know.
So, Mike, where can people learn more about you and your company, as well as find your book?
Sure. The mighty website is spencerpi.com. It's about to get a makeover, but spencerpi.com. And of course, on Amazon, the book is Private Eye Confidential, Stories from a Real PI, published by 99 The Press. And on Twitter, I am at SpencerPI. So that's where you can find me. And on LinkedIn too, if you're that interested.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for quelling my curiosity. I've always been
Oh, good. Any time, guys. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks so much, Mike.